The following session was recorded live in St. Louis, Missouri for the 2001 Annual International Association of Square Dance Callers. This is tape number 7, Demographic Surveys.
We're a smidge early at this point in time, but this session is going to be on the Research and Development Committee's project on the demographic surveys. On my far left is Tim Scholl from Kentucky. He's the Vice Chairman of Research and Development. Terry Wheeler, next to him, is the Chairman of the Research and Development Committee. And, of course, from this morning's session, you might recognize Marty Mayo, who is STAR's research and StarWorks and is basically our market research researcher. The background of this approach to things is kind of different than what was talked about this morning as far as the focus groups and the internet surveys and so forth. The idea behind the demographic survey was to get some knowledge about ourselves so that we can more effectively go for different things like corporate sponsorship and other groups, to be able to tell them who we are, what our likes and dislikes are, and perhaps to set up some kind of relationship for funding for different purposes and so forth down the line. The purpose of the demographics is to identify the ideas about ourselves, what we're about, what our interests are, and that type of thing, so that we can then approach other groups. That's kind of a common form for groups that are applying for funding and going for sponsorships and so forth, and we need to be able to give them an idea. They, of course, have an idea what to do with people that employ their product. We need to tell them what we are about to interest them as far as sponsorship goes. The Executive Committee charged the Research and Development Committee with developing a demographic survey in conjunction with the market research firm of StarWorks in order to be able to identify that. What we also know is out in the real world that there's a lot of interest in studies and things going on at this point in time. What we're going to talk a little bit about is initially our problems and initially trying to develop and learn about things. And then Marty is going to give us a primer on how studies are developed and how to develop studies, and to give us some kind of background if there are groups in your area interested in developing studies. So at this point, I'd like to introduce to you Terry Wheeler, who is in the middle of something else, obviously. I'd like to introduce you to Terry Wheeler, who will give you an idea of what her initial problem-solving methods were in trying to come up with the study. Here's Terry Wheeler.
How many of you have been involved in some form of data collection for square dancing in your local area, for anything? No one. Okay, a couple of you? Did you have fun doing it? Yeah, it can be fun. It can be a headache, too. There's so many different ways that you can do it, and that's what was my question to the executive board and to Mike Jacobs was, what are we really looking for? And so you should always start with what is your goal, what is your purpose, what are your questions, and then create the survey. Most cases, we do it backwards. You shouldn't. This is what Marty is going to help you understand, is how to do it the correct direction. We have a lot going on, and we had to really narrow our field down because we could have easily taken in several other committees' projects and overlapped work. So we had to be very careful on not doing that and to be extremely specific so whatever we do bring in ultimately will mean something. Have you ever heard terms where people go, oh, there's another survey, they'll only do something with it when it gets done? Yeah. But we really are going to do something with this, and it's going to mean a lot. So as we go through this, feel free to ask questions. I know Marty can answer them for you. Shall we go to let Marty take this? We're going to let her get started. She has a flip chart, so she's going to have to be on a mic. And if you want to take notes, please do it. It'll be really good information for you to take back home. Let's all welcome Marty.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate being invited to participate in this wonderful conference. It's been a lot of fun. You can't hear? Maybe I'm just not speaking loud enough. what can I say? Can
1, 2.
Can you hear this?
1, 2.
Maybe I should just talk louder.
Keep going closer.
Closer. Oh my God. I look like a rock star. Okay. We just had a brief discussion about what should be covered in this session, and I hope this is what you really want to hear. As a researcher and a research consultant, it so frequently happens that we get people who come to us who say, well, we want to do a mail survey, or, well, we want to do some focus groups. And my job is to say, well, what exactly caused you to want to do this mail survey, and how did you decide on doing a mail survey? Did you consider doing a survey on the internet, or did you consider doing a telephone survey? Research has many, many tools, but which tool you happen to use depends on what it is that you really want to do, what you want to get out of doing your survey. You don't, or you shouldn't, and I'm going to be really prescriptive in this, and I apologize, but there are just some do's and don'ts in research, and one of the things you don't do is start writing a bunch of questions for your survey before you sat down to think about, well, now, why do I want to do a survey? What I thought I'd do is talk about 3 general areas. First of all, how the overall topic here is, what is the purpose for doing your research? And maybe you start with, okay, how is the information that you gather going to be used? That is a very important question, and before you start anything, you sit down and brainstorm and say, okay, how am I going to use these results? Because how you're going to use the information drives the whole research process. What kind of method you use, how many people you have in your sample, how you select them. It just is the thing that determines everything. I don't know. Why don't you let them decide? Do you want her to write them up? Okay, the next thing is, okay, you've decided how the information is going to be used. What kind of, and usually that's a bunch of decisions that you want to make. You heard Mike Jacobs talk this time about, well, we're looking for sponsors. So that's how you're going to use the information that you would be doing in this demographic survey that they're talking about. That has some implications about your survey structure. Okay, then you have to ask yourself, well, now whose opinions do we need to get? Who would be our sample? And you have to think carefully about who is going to be in a position to answer your questions. And the third area is to list your specific information needs. And this is really the specific items that you want to ask about in your survey or in your focus groups, but not formatted as a questionnaire. Rather just, I want to know some demographics. I want to know what kind of music people like. I want to know whether they shop in big box stores like Walmart's and Home Depot. I want to know, where they get their news information. I want to know, do they drive SUVs or do they drive station wagons? A whole bunch of questions like that you list, and that becomes the basis for any moderator's guide or a survey questionnaire that you do. So I'm going to talk about those 3 areas. First of all, the information uses. Let's start with that. I have here one set of uses for information, and I'm just kind of generalizing it, not specifically to square dancing, but really if you were in business or in another group that wanted to do a survey. One way you might use the information is to sell yourself to sponsors. And now this is one that relates to you. Or you might want to make some investments in new programs, and you want to know which programs are going to be the most productive for you. Or you might want to forecast, if you develop some new programs, what's the likely participation rate in the new programs that you develop? And that would be, relevant to, is it enough people that would be involved so that we could support some suppliers or make a pitch to suppliers to develop some new clothing or whatever for us. So that would be another way that you would use the information. Or you might want to gauge the acceptance of a program. If we put this thing out in the public, is everybody going to say, yuck, I'm not going to do this? Or is everybody going to say, geez, this is great, and everybody comes and joins it? So these are all possible reasons why you might want to do a study. Or you might want to measure satisfaction with something. You may have heard of the company J.D. Power and Associates. It's you may even have received one of their questionnaires, and if you did, I'm sure you spent, as Terry did, an hour filling it out. She's cheap. So the information that J.D. Power and Associates gathers on satisfaction with your vehicles, so that's where they started out 20 years ago, actually 18 or so. They have now spread into satisfaction with hotels, satisfaction with banking institutions. I mean, they spread this idea out there. When you gather information like this, it's very, very important that, let's see, the next issue is the kinds of uses that I've just been talking about are uses that need to be answered with how many people do this, what percentage of people do this, and that's what we call it quantitative. You really want to know, if you're trying to find out what acceptance is, and I'm going to be careful so that I get done, you really are talking about a group of people that you want to reach, and you want to know what percentage of them will do it so that you can gauge numbers for sales or number of programs you need or make a pitch to your suppliers or whatever. You also need to you do a sample because you can't talk to everybody in the category that you want to talk to. So you do a sample. But you have to be very careful that your sample is unbiased representation of the people in your population, and in fact that the relationship between your sample and your population can be defined, and I want to talk about that when we get to the issue of whose opinions do you need to hear. So that in this case, you want to make claims about a certain population based on the sample of people that you actually talk to. We call that quantitative research. On the other hand, supposing the way you wanted to use the information were as follows, you are really looking to design some new programs for your group, or you've got some problems, you've got problems, but you don't really know what the problems are, and you want to diagnose what they are. You have some theories about what the situation is, but you don't really know, and you couldn't go down and list them. So let's say you have some new ideas and you want to find out what the acceptance might be, but it's more, you don't just want them to say yes or no, I accept it or I reject it. You want to know why they say yes or no. And again, you don't know the answers. This would be a kind of research and a kind of use of the information which we call qualitative, and it answers the question how, it answers the question why, it answers the question what reasons, what's going on. So if you think on the one side you've got how many, what percentage, and on the other side you have how, why, what for. Okay, when you talk to a sample on this particular type of research, you want to be sure that your sample is representative of the people that you need to talk to, but they don't have to be in a closely defined relationship to the general population as is required for the first type of response. You have to have enough people in your sample so that if you've got some oddball there, that oddball doesn't completely overwhelm the opinions of the other people and misrepresent really what the situation is. And it always happens when you're doing exploratory work, and we call this exploratory, that somebody is particularly dominant in a group and will talk all the time, and you come away thinking that you know how the group thinks, and that isn't how the group thinks. It's how this particular individual thinks, and you have to be careful about that. That's why you want to have a large enough group or enough groups if you're doing focus groups so that the oddballs are put in perspective. Okay, we talked about that. I said that one is a qualitative approach to doing research and the other is a quantitative approach to doing research. Let me talk a little bit more about that. How your information will be used, as you can see, is going to be very important to you to decide whether you go the quantitative approach or the qualitative approach. Okay? Is that clear? You know, if I'm not being clear, please let me know. Okay? So the research method that you use really depends on your expected use. And as I said, if you wanted to talk about quantitative methods, typically that's a survey, and Terry has a horrendous thing, that J.D. Power Center. That's a classic quantitative survey. But there are other ways to do quantitative work. You can do one-on-one interviews with people so long as you follow some of the rules about having a defined sample and enough people so that you have a balanced some balance in your group. You can do quantitative work with paper surveys. You can do quantitative work on the telephone. You can do quantitative work on the internet, and that's what we did, by the way, just so that you have a direct example. That's what we did when we did the first study that I talked about this morning. That was a quantitative survey done on the internet, and there were 3 questions. Now, we knew more about that because in order for people to be on that internet panel, they had to answer a whole lot of questions about their age, their education, their household income, how many people lived in the house, whether they were married. There were a whole lot of other pieces of information on there. I didn't use it all. I didn't even look at it all because I didn't think it was relevant. So we had the answer, have you ever participated in square dance as an adult? But we also knew whether it was a male or a female, and whether they were over 55 or under 35, whether they were college educated or high school educated, whether they had cars, and you name it. We knew a whole lot of stuff about them. So internet surveys can be very effective ways of doing quantitative work. Let's see. One thing that is required, though, is that any person who answers a quantitative question has to have all the possibilities listed before them. In order for that, you can't just, you cannot use an open-ended question in a quantitative way. That you have to be asked, how do you feel, what is your opinion of square dancing? Is it positive, neutral, negative, or do you not know? And they have 4 choices, and everybody who answers that question has had all 4 choices listed to them. Then, if they don't answer, you know that they didn't answer, and not that they just didn't know and therefore didn't answer. Okay? In order for it to be a true quantitative, you need to present all the options. Now that puts some requirements on how you ask your questions. People often talk about precision, and I'll just mention that. They ask, is this statistically valid? Well, basically, when you talk about statistics, you want to be sure that you have enough people in your sample so that there is some stability in the responses that they get. If you're talking about a group of 30 people, the range that your sample would be very wide. If you're talking about 100 people, it depends on whether you need to know the answer, plus or minus. You've probably heard this whole thing, plus or minus 5 percentage points. If you need to know that is 70%, or is 72%, or 68%, and you need to know it within that narrow margin, then you have to have a larger sample than if all you need to know is that it's more than 50 and less than 80. and that's what they mean by precision. And so your confidence interval, what they call a confidence interval, would be the plus or minus, and that really is determined by the number of people in your sample, and that's another thing that you have to think about when you do your research design. Let's just move on to qualitative methods. Again, we can talk with interviews. We can do interviews on the telephone. We can do focus groups. We can do paper surveys. You can do paper surveys with, check all that apply. You can do paper surveys with an open end. Why did you do this? Don't recommend doing that. People find it hard to answer. And the whole issue of how precise or how many people in the sample or is it statistically valid is really not such an important issue in qualitative work as it is in quantitative work. In quantitative, you're always trying to say, out of a certain population, what percentage do X or Y? And therefore, you have to be very careful about how you design the group. Okay, third issue, and this is a real quickie run through. Hopefully, that you will have thought about these things when you sit down to do some research in your own groups. That you start out and say, okay, how am I going to use the information? Who do I need to talk to? And then what is the information that I want to have? Okay, that's three key things to think about. Talking about whose opinions need to be heard. And here I'm going to want to use that. Well, when I'm ready. Your choice of whose opinions you need to hear, you have to think about. And it's really, it could be that you want to talk to some target group. And that's really what we were doing in our focus groups. We wanted to find out what people in some target that we might want to make a pitch to about square dancing, we wanted to know what they thought about square dancing. And so we were very careful to define those people as between the ages of 35 and 50, people who were physically capable of doing something like square dancing, people who had partners that they liked to do things with in the evenings. I think those were the specifics. We were also looking for maybe a mix of males and females, but we wanted to be sure that these were the kinds of people that we would like to attract into square dancing and that they were capable of being there. Another category that you might want to hear opinions from is a membership. And about 9 years ago, CALLERLAB did a survey of its membership, of its callers, and they built a questionnaire, and they decided to draw a sample from the all callers. Not everybody got one of these questionnaires, and so they really were trying to find out what callers thought about, some issues, program issues, and were they experiencing a fall off in the number of dancers, and there were a lot of business items on that survey at that time. So that was that's who you wanted to talk to, your membership. Another category of people you might want to talk to is opinion leaders or knowledgeable people. For instance, if you want to talk about your preferences in square dance music or your preferences in dancer preferences, various things, issues that you might want to raise in dancing, you'd have to think about, there are a number of possibilities. One might be that you want to talk to the club leadership. Because, or if, let's say you're talking about, are you having trouble recruiting people? You would want to talk to your club leadership because the people, many of the members in the clubs wouldn't know if there's trouble recruiting or if there's, if the expense of hiring halls, etc., is too high. Those people wouldn't know, so you'd have to be very careful to pick people who have been in a leadership position in a club. Is that making sense? That you don't ask a question of somebody who isn't in possession of the information to answer it. Because unfortunately, many respondents are very obliging and they'll give you an answer whether they know or not. And that's just one of those things. And if you're trying to diagnose problems in the square dance community or in the enterprise, you might want to talk to people who have decided to walk from it, just to find out why they rejected you. And so when you're thinking about your information needs, you have to think very carefully about, well, now who is it that I want to talk to. And, you know, it may not be who you think. The people that you talk to have to be representative of the population that you want to hear. And if it's qualitative, they don't necessarily have to be everybody in the group, but they do have to represent the people that you want. And I wanted to talk about one thing in a quantitative sample. Let's say you have a population of people like this. One of the things that when you do a sample, what you really want to do is make a statement about everybody in this population. So that you have to be very careful that your sample comes from all over in this population, like this. And this is a really tricky thing. And sampling is, I would say, if you think about research as a three-legged stool, one is the questionnaire that gathers the information from you. Another leg is the sample, the people that give you the answers to it. The third leg is how you analyze it and interpret the results, okay? And if you have a short leg in any bit of this, you're going to do problems with your survey and with your research. So sampling is a key issue. Supposing you did something like this, and it turns out that all the people who responded to your survey came out of here inadvertently. I mean, this can happen. You're going to make a statement about this total population, but in fact, everybody came from here. And so you have to think about that. One of the principles that is typically used is a random selection of everybody, which means, and I'm going to use this word defined, it means that everybody in your sample has a defined relationship to the total population, which means they have a X probability of being in the sample, and that X probability of being in the sample is the same for everybody in your sample. That gives you the right to project the results from your sample to your total population. Does that make sense? Oh, the question was, she was asking for clarification on what is the defined relationship between the sample and your population. It means, by defining it, means that everybody has an equal percentage of being included in the sample. Or, if not exactly equal, it is defined and you know what the percentage is.
That way, if you have a question, we'll bring the mic around and we'll be sure to get it on tape. So.
Okay, am I being heard? Okay. Well, this is really the main thing that I wanted to point out. Or one of the ways that you can randomize a sample is to do a sort on something that's like alphabetical on first names. And so there's no rhyme or reason why people have, you know, Terry or Marty or Mike. And so you do that sort, and then you take if you have a population of 100 people and you want 10 people in your sample, you do every 10th name right along the list. And it's just a systematic way of making sure that there is a principle for you to select your sample that is not based on the response to your survey.
The demographic survey that we're attempting to set up was trying to do this kind of randomness. So the Home Office decided to do it by zip, which would eliminate the Canadians and overseas personnel from it, and it was every 20th name in that zip code list. The fascinating thing is what happened with just that kind of random selection. There were like 55 people, or 51 people names came up on it, including several full-time callers, including me. I showed up on the list totally by accident, and including Larry Letson, who sent us a list of 10,000 names, because his database was filled with all the people that vacation in the Valley in Texas, and that's his dancer environment. Well, so there were obviously things we had to throw out because it really screws up sampling, and so it just the randomness of it we were trying for, but yet look at what can happen easily. There are ways that it would skew, just like what Marty was talking about there, the way that it skews up the whole list. But we ended up coming up with somewhere around, there's about 2,000 names right now in the database. Close to 3,000 is what we're eventually going to get. But there were all kinds of problems with each individual on it. So just coming up with a random group doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a free and easy path to getting information back. It ends up being complicated by each of the individual's personalities.
Yeah, and there's more to that story, a lot more. What they're talking about is they really wanted to speak to the dancers. And the issue of how to get your arms around the dancers in this country is complex, as I'm learning, more complex than I thought. Every time I think I've got it understood, it isn't. So they were going to take a two-tiered random process, where the first random selection is random selection among the callers, and then we were going to take everybody on the caller's current dancer list and do that survey so that we could somehow make sure that we had complete coverage of the country and that we were pulling all of the current dancers from this. So it's a two-tiered one, and that means that every single dancer in your survey has a defined relationship to the population, because they have, I don't know, let's say there are 800 callers and there are 50 in your survey, so the first piece of that is 50 divided by 800. That percentage is their probability of their callers being selected. And then for each one, it's the probability of being selected is 100%, because every single dancer in that caller's group is there. So that 100% is multiplied by the caller percentage, and that's your defined relationship between the respondent and the population. This is a very complex issue. That's why I'm not real happy about those 10,000 people, and why we're going to call in somebody who's a real pro in this field. Okay, so that's really, yeah. Then the only other thing that I really wanted to talk about, and this is just a mechanism for getting your questions. And that's maybe an approach to developing your questionnaire. I mean, there's a whole lot of details about questionnaire development, but I don't think we need to talk about that. So let's say, on the current demographic thing, you would sit down and what are the issues that you want to deal with? Well, first of all, maybe square dance preferences. And then you say, well, we want to talk about media usage. And you might want to talk about demographics. And I don't know what else you might want to talk about. You think, what other kinds of categories that you might want to do? Let's say, what kind of uses, let's say. And the reason for this might be, well, we want to go to Coke and we want to make a pitch that the kind of people in our square dancer group are really in your target market. These people are users of your product. Or, for instance, you might want to know about cars. Let's say you want to make a pitch to Buick. You want to let it be known that the people in the square dancer population mostly drive domestic vehicles and are the kinds of people that people who drive domestic vehicles like to see, because they're people like themselves. So, and what you do is you go and you make a list like this. Now, in this case, we know who's going to be on the other side. What I'd like to do here is issues. Okay, this is what the kinds of topics that you're going to treat in your questionnaire. And over here, you're going to put who can answer these questions. And it's real important to think this through as you start planning for your research. In this case, we know that who can answer these questions is your square dancer population. You don't have to worry about opinion leaders. But if your issue is, what about the club management? And those are legitimate issues. I mean, there are issues of club management. Clubs are having trouble. Sometimes the demands, just the administrative demands are very high. Who's going to be able to answer that question? So when you go through and develop your list of items that you want to ask about, you have to write over here, well, now who can answer that question? And if you're going to do one survey, you want to make sure that all the questions you put on that survey can be answered by the same group of people. Does that make sense? Okay, I think that's about, like a quickie trip through survey development. Maybe, you know what, you want to hold this? Sure. Another issue is writing the questionnaire. And let me just say, there's an excellent book written by a man named Don Dillman. It's an old book, but it's one of the best how-to books that I know, and it's called Mail and Telephone Surveys. Dillman is D-I-L-L-M-A-N. And a couple of pieces of advice. You think about doing a survey. If you're doing a survey, a quantitative survey, or even if it's a qualitative survey, people take time, their precious time to answer your survey. And so you have to give them a good reason for wanting to do it. So motivate them. Motivate them with a cover letter, or, there's something that they're going to get because they give you their time. They're going to get something, like the satisfaction of helping their organization, the satisfaction of helping General Motors make better vehicles because they answered the J.D. Power survey. Or, like in her case, $1, which makes her feel guilty, so she thinks about answering this questionnaire. There's something has to tell them there's a reason to answer the survey. Now, when you start a survey, one of the things you want to do is start with questions that get them hooked, that motivate them, that are of interest to them. You don't want to just plop the things that are of interest to you right out there. You have, like demographic issues are typically more of interest to you than it is to them. They know who they are. They don't need to answer that. So you usually put those at the end of the survey, and they're willing to give you the information because they've given you all the rest of the information up front, and they've gotten hooked with the whole process. So then they'll tell you about themselves. A couple of tips. That's all I got to say.
Let me just add to what she was saying. This J.D. Power survey came about 3 weeks ago, and of all people, somebody trying to work on a survey gets a survey that takes an hour to fill out. Okay, like she said, I got hooked because of the $1. Not necessarily, though. It made me feel a little guilty, I agree. They did 3 hits on me, though. First, I got a postcard, easy to read, because I don't know who J.D. Powers is. Sounds either like a solicitor or a lawyer. Either way, I guess they're both solicitors, depending what country you live in. So this easy-to-read postcard said, "We're going to be sending you the survey. Appreciate your help if you'll fill it out." Okay, right? 2 days later, in comes this thick envelope. There's 8 pages of survey here. And in it is a little piece of paper attached to the $1 saying, "We really appreciate your time. Now I feel a little guilty." Brand new $1 bill. So I don't throw the envelope away. I put it where I know I can find it when I finally have time to do it because I'm busy. Well, I don't get to it right away. 5 days later, they don't have enough time for me to get the survey back. They hit me again. Another postcard. "We hope you're filling it out. We really need your help." Okay, you got me. So the next chance I had, I sat down, took an hour, and I'll mail it as soon as our convention is done. Do not send out an 8-page survey. The odds of getting it back are slim to none. They're going to be expensive. I would say, this is my opinion, okay? I've worked on a lot of different things. Try to keep your survey down to no more than 2 pages. Ours may end up being 4. So we're going to have to do a little extra motivating to get the people, the dancers, to fill it out. We're really, really hoping that they are so enthused with this activity and knowing that there's a little bit of problem with it, that they're going to feel really good about sending it in. That's where we're going to need your help as the callers or the dancers. If you do run across a dancer with our survey down the road, encourage them to send it back. We're going to do our best to encourage them, to motivate them to send it back to us. The plan is not final how we're going to do that, but we have several good ideas. The survey is in 4 different categories, like she was talking about, as far as our subject matter. We try to make it mentally organized, easy to read. I've had several people so far here fill it out for me and give me corrections, ideas, because no matter how much you look at a paper, I'll tell you, you're going to get brain fried on it. So do a test sampling before you send it out. Make sure other people interpret the activity the way you do. Okay? Are there any questions now, either of Marty, Mike, myself, Tim, that you all would like to ask?
If you'll just, we'll bring you the mic, state your name for the tape, and then we'll find somebody to give you an answer.
Meg Ferguson from California. I was wondering if you had more information about the book by Don Dillman. You said the title was Mail and Telephone Surveys. Do you know the publisher or the year of publication?
I believe it was published in the 70s, and I don't know who published it. I've got it. It cost $60. It's still in publication. I bought it 2 years ago. I lost it and repurchased it.
There's there's a wonderful book out there that just gives you a whole intro to all of these concepts, not just what we're talking about here, but this morning as well. I know it's going to sound dumb, but it's marketing for dummies. I mean, you've seen all these yellow books on every other topic. There's one out there on marketing, and what I found very interesting was I picked up the book initially when we got into all this, and what I found, the people that Marty and Jim have talked about are all quoted in there. And it's very much right up the road and explains a lot of things in very, not simplistic, but in simpler terms, that it really leads you up a path to really thinking about things. And it's cross-referenced very well, so you can find pretty much what you want to do with it, and at least gives you a primer to be able to then move on to other things. And so it's really a good book, and so I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm dummy at it, and I did find out a lot about what was going on with it. So.
We must hand the mic. Make sure you give us your name.
I just wondered, when they sent you that survey, I'm thinking of it in terms with our survey, when they sent you that, did they tell you why they were asking you? Did they give you a mission statement or whatever you might want to call it? All right, but now a lot of people, if you're doing a square dance one, theoretically you should say this is an American tradition and we're trying to perpetuate an American tradition. It's not, ultimately it is to make money like everything else, but they have to understand that you're not getting their information
exactly
for profit. It's for an altruistic motive as well as the profitable motive, and that allays any suspicion, because personally I don't want my name, address, or whatever floating around anywhere.
That's right.
Okay.
When we initially asked the callers to approach their dancers to give us their list of dancers, we had to do a promise right then and there that that list would not be used for any other purpose but our survey, period. We will not give it to anybody, sell it to anybody. As we do this again, our cover letter will try to encourage them of what we're doing, how good it can be, that they're part of the future, and that we, again, promise that their information will not be used for anything else but our promotion of square dancing for this project. In other words, 2 years down the road, that information probably is old information. We'll never use it again. So you're right. We have to really make sure we're clear and honest about it. Any other questions?
Gene Triplett from North Carolina. We had one of the focus groups in Charlotte this past fall, and one of the problems we had when we were getting our list together was getting the list. The clubs don't seem to maintain this information for any period of time, so if you have clubs, encourage them to keep all this information on hand so that we do have it. But we had a very difficult time just securing enough names and people that would volunteer to come out and do the focus group for our third session of the people who had started classes or were members of clubs. So we do need to start and collect this information and hang on to it.
Let me reinforce that. It was not just in Charlotte that we had this problem, and we had in some other cities clubs that refused to give up their name list of ex-dancers, former dancers, class dropouts, because they were suspicious that other clubs would use them. So, I mean, what the process of getting a list of people to include in our focus groups of dropouts from the square dance activity revealed something about the level of marketing in the square dancer community, and this is just something that I did mention it. It's kind of a fundamental of marketing. As I said, once you got them through the door, it costs you less to keep them. Even if they've walked in the door once and gone out, you at least know who they are and where they are. And this name list is an invaluable resource. Don't let it go.
We must understand that the uniqueness of this activity doesn't stop with our mental capability of doing it or physical. One of the major things that makes our activity different from any other is that the participants run it, own it. Almost anything else you get into, there's a businessman that puts things together for you. You go to the health club, businessman runs it. You go to the bowling alley, businessman runs it. We have a handicap because we are participant driven, and we have to enforce how important it is to be professional. And so many of us get into square dancing and we learn through trial and error this information. So we have to make sure we educate and keep talking. More questions?
Francine Hausman, I was wondering, when do you expect your survey to hit the square dancers?
When do I expect it, or when would I like it?
Like it.
Personally, with the information that we've received this weekend, not only doing some test sampling, Marty's information, and being able to finally meet and communicate with the executive board in person. You know, telephone and emails are nice, but there's a limit. I should think, this is my wish, I would like to have the actual survey completed within the next 30 days. We still have a little bit of work to do about gathering the final names. We're missing one section. That may be accomplished in 30 to 60 days. So, ideally, in 60 days, I'd like to see the square dancers have it in their hands. Will it happen? Heaven only knows. You know, depends on other problems. So when you do see it out there, they'll encourage the dancers to do it. Any other questions?
Gene Triplett again. What type of criteria are you using to select these dancers? I heard you speak just a little bit earlier about it.
Right. It is definitely random. We had no control over where it went, except we took out of our database of CALLERLAB every 20th first name. Okay, we did eliminate anything out of country because we're trying to get the demographics of the United States. At that point, there were 50 callers chosen. Each caller got a letter. I got a total of 34 responses. There were some callers on the list. Phone number disconnected. Hello. You know, this is kind of scary. It's supposed to be an up-to-date database. There were 16 callers that either did not respond or chose not to because they no longer had a club, or they were not calling two clubs. They just had one-night stands, you know, replacement caller type. So these 16 callers we have to replace, maintaining the randomness and getting the total population that we want to sample. And that's what we're going to be working with Marty on.
Needless to say, I think this whole issue of sampling is not yet fully resolved because I'm not quite sure I understand what the population of square dancers is. And if it is, you know, I was originally in making recommendations assuming that every square dancer was somehow connected to a square dance caller, so that if you went on this double process from to the callers and then to the dancers with them, that you would hit the total population of dancers. Now we're in danger, remember this picture that I drew over here, of drawing only part of the population of square dancers, namely those that are connected to callers. So I would like to say that this whole issue of sample is not yet put to bed. If I'm offering advice and asked to offer advice, I need to understand better the population of square dancers so that I can give better advice about how to get a truly representative sample. So.
This is almost indicative of the whole problem that faces all of us in all parts of the activity. You've always been asked by non-dancers about what's dancing about, and you give up answering the question before you ever attempt to try to answer it because it's so massive. People ask me, well, do I sign contracts? Do I get specific amounts for a weekend? Do I do this, do that? And I go, yes, all of the above. And so many of our scenarios in square dancing involve all of the above. A lot of what Marty found out in the focus groups found ourselves very inflexible in our situations. At the same time, square dancing also kind of defies description because of our flexibility. We are almost everything to everyone in all kinds of different ways. Do we have singles groups? Yes. Do we have team groups? Yes. Do we have organized square dance groups? Yes. Do we have unorganized square dance groups? Yes. And so we have so many different factors, and because it has grown so pell-mell and haphazardly across the years, it's many of our square dance organizations are at best umbrella groups as opposed to being really key organizers in the area. And so it's really hard to define ourselves because we've never really defined ourselves. And it's interesting that her comments mirror Jim Henley's comments when he first came to us. Is that he thought he knew what the animal was about, and he only saw the backside of the elephant, and he finally got around to seeing the front side of it. So it's really fascinating to get an outsider's opinion of what square dancing looks like and appears to them.
Jim Masco from USA West. Can you tell us how expensive this process is? How much has been invested in the focus groups, and how much is budgeted in this future sampling?
Of course, you can pretty much mathematically figure out if we're sending out 3,000 pieces of mail at 34 cents, or whatever the post office decides that to be whenever we do get it out. And so that's part of the process. Part of the process also then getting somebody professional analyze it and how much we're going to have them do of it. To the degree that we collate some of the information ourselves, then automatically that lowers the cost. If we were to just pile all that material to Marty's firm, it would certainly be a lot more per hour and a lot more expensive. So, like all of these things, it highly depends upon how much we end up doing on a volunteer basis versus how much we hand it in the hands of the professionals. In one respect, the focus groups were done as cheaply as possible. They were not, we budgeted for a lot of money for them, wanting to make sure they were done correctly, and we managed to get away with some money here and some money there, so they weren't the final bottom line. And I guess as far as planning goes, that's really the best philosophy, is budget for the most and try to get away with as less as possible and still get the job done. But ultimately, we're at a point in square dancing, I think, where we have to get the job done. So we're at a point where we got to pay the piper. So as far as what the specifics of the focus groups are, I don't have them on. Do you remember them, Jim? Yeah. But as far as what costs what in what city, we actually got somebody going through an area one time, or it was okay.
On focus groups, the number of things figure in. First of all, there's the cost of the moderator, and that usually includes writing a guide and helping interpret results. Then you have the cost of bringing the people into your group, and you have to pay them something. I mean, you got to motivate them to come down to some place. And then you also have to pay for the place. And places usually cost $300 to $400 per group, and you usually pay respondents anywhere from $30 to $60 to $75 per individual. The going price for a focus group tends to be $4,000 to $6,000 to $7,000 per group if you're going to do this with an expensive organization. I don't think yours cost about $3,200, $3,300 per group by the time you finish paying for everything. So they were cheaper. It's partly because I wasn't, charging you as much as some people would when I did the focus groups. But if you pay a regular focus group moderator to do it, and you go to a professional place and you pay what they call the incentives, you're getting up to
$4,000 to $6,000 a group.
Marty was not chosen because she's Jim Mayo's sister. There were three other groups looked at, and we went back to Marty because she was the best for the job, not just because we had convenient knowledge of her. So we went through a process of looking at other different people, and this ended up being still our best bet.
I got a question for you all. Anybody here right now is thinking about or already tasked with some type of surveying project soon? Oh dear. Can you tell us just a really brief what it is?
Bob Jones, Troy, Ohio. I'm working through the presidency of ISGCA, going through a survey with our apathy.
Your what?
Our apathy.
Okay, our apathy. Okay. Anybody else is about to do a survey or something? After this, I bet you'll have ideas on what to do. Okay, Mike wants some questions.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a broad category. You have anything specific in mind, or
that's why I'm in here right now. As soon as I seen that demographics, that's the first thing I told the wife. I will be there, and I've hit all these marketing programs. Because we've got to do something to get our callers united. Before we've got a lot of fronts to fight with this thing, other than just our dancers. We have a lot of fronts. Our people are going to be spread thin, so we must fight hard.
Have you gotten to a point of where you were deciding some questions you wanted answers to, or you still?
I mull this around, and every time I rethink the process, I throw some questions out. I started out, I had about 75 in my mind. I've got it narrowed down now to about 7 that I really want to ask. But again, I was having a little trouble finding out. You were very enlightening on who could answer the questions, and that's what I needed. That was I think this is going to help me the best right here. I could never find out who I needed to send them to. And, of course, in the test process will be the best, or the test men will be good also. So that'll eliminate a lot of money spent.
Go ahead.
Are you really exploring, trying to find out something that you don't know the answer to?
Yes.
Or you don't have some suspicions about?
I have some suspicions, but
you
I
really
can't
don't
get
know.
the people to speak. You know, they will speak good behind your back, but they won't speak to you openly. That's the association. So you have to get around that.
So you really want to use what I would call a qualitative approach to your research, more exploratory, not necessarily a questionnaire or a paper survey, but maybe even something like a focus group. You might consider alternative approaches to gathering your information.
Now you're going to make me go back and rethink this whole process.
That's exactly it.
But if it's worth doing, it's worth waiting on. I mean, it hasn't gotten this way overnight. I'm not going to correct it overnight. Me as president or the next president or the next president. It is not going to happen that quickly.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole point is to sit down and start thinking about what kind of information do I need and how am I going to use this information, and do I already can I lay out, is it a how many in percentage question, or is it really why and how approach, whereupon you might explore other methods.
And as far as cost-wise, Marty wasn't hatched. I mean, she was trained, and there are universities with marketing programs and so forth that might be interested in. You certainly might not have the same quality interviewer that you would at this particular level, but you might have somebody that is interested in getting a chance to do a focus group, and therefore they might give it to you on a cheaper basis than what we employ here.
Let me just say that when I was starting out with my own business 10 years ago, I did do some pro bono work for CALLERLAB. And that I didn't charge for that at that time. And it involved guiding them through the process that led to the caller survey that I told you about. We had about 70% response rate to that survey. Phenomenal. That doesn't happen every day.
And so particularly if you can offer to an interviewer a chance to work with people that are focused on a given subject are really interested in and really interested in participating, that it might offer them an avenue to go ahead and get things done on their side too. So both hands wash each other, and it's a chance to do something.
Let me go back to one question about the money spent. I don't have dollar numbers for you, but I do want to assure you, in the marketing session this morning, Jim Hensley was talking about increasing funding for this stuff and ask your dancers to donate and different projects. I want you to know that CALLERLAB is sitting on this and penny pinching every penny to get the most out of it without destroying the quality of product we're going to have when we're done. They're not wasting a penny. They have systems set up to okay the use of the money. Not one person can just give the okay and have it fly. So I want you to have confidence in CALLERLAB that they're watching this extremely close, but they also know that quality is not cheap. So I want you to have faith in them, please. Okay, any other questions? Yes. Here he comes. Man with the mic.
Francine Houseman again. I just wanted to ask, you were talking about the labor needed to maybe save some money on your survey analysis work, and I was wondering if you might ever consider approaching a group of square dancers to volunteer some time to help do some of the legwork to assist you in collecting and assimilating your information.
Are you speaking of this survey in particular that we're working on at the moment? Well, so far it's all paper and through the mail. So I haven't been approached about any idea of person-to-person type contact. The data entry. There is talk about having it hired out and things like that. So, yeah, it won't necessarily mean I have to do it all. But that's what I do for a living anyway. So, yeah, she's offering.
Bill Houseman, St. Louis. The survey you're talking about, it sounds like you are surveying callers and their club members.
Not the callers. The dancers in their clubs.
Fine. In St. Louis, we have dancer-run clubs. So I assume that our 1,500 square dancers in St. Louis will not be surveyed?
You're right. If they do not belong to a club that a caller calls for. It doesn't have to be a caller-run club. If that caller is a member of CALLERLAB and showed up on the list, we don't care if it's a caller-run or a dancer-run club. Okay.
Jim, can you get I think Jim have an answer, so do I. But
I think that raises an important point, that we don't making a distinction between a mailing list that a caller has and a mailing list that a club has. One of the things that I expected when we said let's go to callers and ask them for mailing lists is that they would get the mailing list for the club they call for. I call for 3 clubs, and I have membership lists from each of them. And if CALLERLAB wrote and said, we're doing a survey, can you send us a list of your members, I just sent them a copy of the list without a second thought. One of the surprises we got in looking for information is that it turns out many clubs were very, very possessive of that information, unwilling to release it in any form, and if the club has that attitude, they can't be included in the survey because we don't have any way of getting that unless we can get dancers to help in the project.
But this group was not recruited for being caller-operated groups only. There were groups that turned in club function lists or whatever to Terry. We also had turndowns from groups that callers were not allowed to pass out their membership lists.
Since we were part of the focus group here in St. Louis, and I supplied you with the list of people to contact, I went to our local square dance organization, again a square dancer run organization, which was the Greater St. Louis Folk and Square Dance Federation, and got their mailing list of dancers and ex-dancers. And I was able to get it from that organization as opposed to going to local clubs, because I'm sure the local clubs wouldn't have given it to me either.
Well, but to the degree that we are specific about who we pick out to do it, removes the randomness that Marty addressed so well here with that map. And so it's if we control it, it's no longer random, and we need that initial randomness to be able to prove the validity of the survey.
I'm also a little leery about an association that would give out a list when a club wouldn't. If I'm on that club's list, I'd like to know I have my choice of whether it goes out or not. And that's why we felt more comfortable with the caller asking the club, whether it be caller run or dancer run, and the club as a whole votes yay or nay. If there's any one person that says they don't want their name on that list, they're welcome to take it off. See? And that way, hopefully they don't feel slighted when they get it in the mail.
And ultimately, we thought it was easier to track down 50 people that we knew and had contact with than the next layer of 3,000 to try to track them down individually. Yeah.
We also didn't want 10,000 names, like we got on this one Excel spreadsheet that took 45 minutes to download. You know. So, any other questions? A faster connection. I live out in the country. I run at 28.8. That's the best I can do. Better than I do, she says. Any other questions? You sure? She has another one. I mean, we got at least 10 minutes, 15.
I'm sorry, I'm not even a caller, but I'm a caller's partner.
You are wonderful.
So I'm observing it from a different point of view than a caller. The thing that I think you'd like to know is why people have a negative view of square dancing. One thing I noticed, kids had this in gym in high school, not called by a caller, but called by a gym teacher. And one young couple I met, I said to the girl, why don't you guys come to the square dance? And she said to her boyfriend, could we? He said, isn't that what we did in gym? So I think if I were asking, I'd ask them non-dancers, what do you think about square dancing? And some of them think that we're clowns. They really do. Mm-hmm. And I think they should realize that in one of the bulletins they said, one evening of square dance is equivalent to walking 3 miles. That's something that means something to a non-dancer.
Okay, what you're speaking of is part of the focus group, I think, because they went to non-dancers. I think, now correct me you guys, because I'm not well versed on this, there is a project going around that will hopefully get a grant so that professional callers can go into the schools to do the teaching for square dancing. So I have no idea how far along that is or how successful, but I heard about it this morning in marketing. Okay, but this particular survey that we are doing has to go to current dancers, not dancers that have been out for a year, current dancers, so that we can go to General Motors or Coca-Cola and say, this is what our square dance population is right now, and we support, you know. So we want to keep it really isolated to what we currently have. Next project may be that.
And that's part of the thing, is there's so many different aspects to the problem we got. If we try to do everything all at once, nothing gets accomplished. And we have fallen into that trap. We tried the spokesman route to suddenly cure all of our problems in one swell swoop. Well, it didn't work that way. And this way is going to be slower, more costly, more time-consuming, and yet probably holds the hope of being far better because it's been done by other people before. Nobody suddenly had a magic turnaround in the world of business because they suddenly adopted somebody as a spokesperson. I mean, look at Pepsi and Michael Jackson. So if we want to try to solve our problems, we need to understand what our problems are. And I'm not sure that we've all really come to grips with what that aspect is. You certainly identified one of them, but there's certainly a whole lot of others out there. Until we get some information to make an educated opinion and then make some educated decisions, we're kind of wandering around in the dark.
What we're trying to do with this survey is I have it at 4 pages and not let it go past that. Now that means 2 pages double-sided for a couple reasons. Any longer than that, nobody will fill it out. And even at that, I'm pushing my luck. Secondly is mailing, right? You start shoving that envelope full of stuff, and guess what? The cost just went up. So I'm trying to keep it to 1 ounce, you know. And she has given us more ideas today, which means I'm going to have to reorganize. So small is good in this case. Any other questions? Well, I'll close it down here. I want to thank Mike and Tim and Marty for helping out with all of this. Let's give them a big hand. Marty is up here if you have any additional questions that you might want to just talk real quick on. So we're ending about 15 minutes early. You can be the first to get your drinks.